Tomorrow morning, jury selection will resume in Fort Lauderdale in the penalty phase of the trial of the man who was pleaded guilty in the massacre at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High 4 years ago.
That jury selection process in that Broward courtroom is in many ways the standard part of the criminal justice process. Though in this time, in so many ways, it is such a very different challenge. We take that dive today with Gail Levine, a veteran Miami-Dade prosecutor involved in countless jury selections for some of South Florida's most high-profile cases. Gail, it is great to have you aboard today.
Gail, welcome back.
Thank you.
We're always glad to have your expertise. So let's simply say here, Elizabeth Scherer, the judge presiding over this trial, is going to again begin the jury selection process. How long would you think it's going to take?
I think it's going to take until probably the end of May. I think that this process is going to be long, arduous, difficult, and it's going to take a lot for jurors to dig deep and tell the truth.
That'll come, I guess, the attorneys will be looking for those truths in the next phase. Right now, our people on the ground there are reporting that this first phase, they're looking for people who will have hardships with being able to upend their lives and sit in a courtroom and listen to this for how many months. I mean, a trial is going to take a very long time, and that's a difficult thing for the average South Floridian to do. And I guess, you know, the jury selection process, people get their little notice and they go in and they roll their eyes and they try to get out of it. And so sitting and watching these people, some legitimately with hardships and some just trying to get out of it, I mean, how do you impress upon a citizen how critical this service is?
Well, let me explain. First of all, I'm a retired prosecutor now, but what I always started my jury selection with, every single jury selection, was that jury service in a time of non-war, where there is no draft, is the only thing we actually ask you to perform, to do as an American citizen. Of course, besides paying your taxes, jury service is the most important thing you can do as an American citizen. And I think when people realize that this isn't just a joke, it's not to see who has the funniest line as to why they can't serve. People serve like they serve in the military because it's necessary for our system of justice. It does not work without honesty and realistic aspirations of every juror to do a good job. And that's what they do.
Yeah,
in war, that's what we do.
Yeah, and in this case, this very specific case, this very high profile, heartbreaking case, where they are going to be looking at the shooter for a very long time, day in, day out. This jury will decide whether he lives or dies for his crime. It's a very emotional, I will tell you firsthand, as a juror, which I was thrilled to be, because who would ever think a reporter locally would be chosen for a jury? But I will say firsthand, it's a very emotional, gut-wrenching process, which you have to put aside to look at facts and evidence very coldly. Journalists kind of do that for a living, but the average citizen does not. What would you say to that jury pool about that experience?
I don't think we ask you to stop being human. We don't. Many, many times in my experience picking jurors, I have had jurors cry. And I have had jurors, when they do that, dig deep. Can they sit? Some people cry because they realize they can. Some people cry because they realize they can't. And during the testimony, sometimes jurors cry. Sometimes jurors cry for either side.
And what does that do legally as a, you know, for a defense attorney to see a juror crying? What is legally, what might happen there? Is that cause for
they might be crying because they feel sorry for the defendant. It's not always they cry because they're going to impose the death penalty. People are emotional. This is emotional. And by the way, all death penalty cases take long to try. It's a fallacy if you think it's done in 2 weeks. I've picked juries for weeks and weeks and weeks at a time in many death penalty cases that had a lot less media than this one.
Yeah.
So I think that it's very, very important that we realize how serious this process, this particular process, jury selection is.
Yeah,
Everybody should look to sit.
yeah, understood. Gail, I can't think of another higher profile trial in South Florida, in 30 years than this one, and a community which, I mean, who didn't know about 17 students, adults being shot to death, 17 others being wounded, and an entire community suffering psychological damage? How do you find somebody who can say, well, yeah, I heard about it, but I can still be fair? Can you do that?
Sure. I think that people have to understand that we've all heard about it and you all have reported on it, but they're not going to be spending 4 months putting on evidence that you already heard. Everybody's going to be presenting evidence that no one has heard. They're going to present evidence about the crime. They're going to show you the crime. The defense is going to explain to you about his particular being. They are going to do so much more. It is impossible to me to say that you already have an opinion when basically you have heard nothing. So unless you are morally or somehow opposed to the death penalty in an appropriate case, you should be willing to listen to what we say are the aggravating factors, those factors that weigh in for the penalty of death, against the mitigating factors that weigh for a sentence of life.
Yeah.
That's what you're supposed to do. Open-minded and think and listen. Lots of evidence you've never heard.
Yeah, I was going to say the jurors and the community at large, even though we're going to see new things, what we are going to see in large part is going to be grisly, horrifying, terrible. The wounds of this automatic, semi-automatic rifle, which pierced the bodies of 34 people. I mean, this is just deadly stuff.
Well, it's how you prove that the death penalty may be appropriate in this case. We call that heinous, atrocious, and cruel. And you have to prove that aggravating factor beyond a reasonable doubt. And the way we do that in all death penalty cases where that's an aggravating factor is that we show the suffering, the human suffering, each individual victim had to endure.
Gail, in the 30 seconds or so we have left, you have nothing to do firsthand with this. You have sort of an objective overview of this case. What do you think would be the perfect juror for this case?
I would look for somebody that's willing to listen. I would look for somebody that's willing to think, and most importantly, to follow the law and not necessarily their heart. The law is what counts in these cases.
Well said. We appreciate your vast experience and understanding of this case. Thank you very much, Gail Levine. Always good to have you.
Thank you for having me.